I come to you today perturbed. Perturbed for what was 3 reasons, now it's 4. Clip Champs keeps crashing on me. I have done this video 3 times now. Microsoft, I absolutely loathe you. Number 2, I'm mad at myself for being lazy. This is a video that I should have made ages ago. Number 3, I am mad at Arrowhead Pride because they used the headline before I got around to doing it. And number 4 is that I am mad at the very subject matter of this video. Guys, we've spent a lot of time debating over the past few days, maybe it's been weeks now, the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas. I'm a Missouri guy, so I believe the Kansas City Chiefs are inherently a Missouri team. For some reason, our mayor is the most flaccid individual on Twitter and says he doesn't think there's a difference. Who's paying your check? Who's signing your check? The Kansas City, Missouri side of things. Anyway, we need look no further than St. Louis. So this is an argument for Kansas City in general. This is a pro-Kansas City argument of this video, part of this video, without talking about Missouri or Kansas in it. I've got my feelings on that. I'm not going to get into that here. But we need look no further than the other side of the state of Missouri for what happens financially when you lose an NFL franchise. It's devastating for not just your city, but for the entire area. There's a lot of estimates, and I think that they are probably too conservative for the type of economic, and I know there's much bigger arguments than economic, but this is a place where you get to use numbers, so it kind of becomes an easier to flesh out argument. I think conservative numbers that I've seen are that hosting an NFL playoff game brings $6 to $11 million into the city. You've got the camera crew coming in. They've got to get a hotel. They've got to eat food. You've got the other team coming in. You've got all these fans from another place coming in, all of these different things. And it's the playoffs, so you've got different fancier camera crews and whatever it is. $6 to $11 million per playoff game hosted in your city to the benefit of the city and the surrounding areas. Patrick Mahomes seems to like to host playoff games. But what I'm talking about here is that the Chiefs invariably, in article after article, are listed as the 3rd or 4th best roster in the NFL. Invariably. That is what is happening. The Kansas City Chiefs are being listed as the 3rd or 4th best team in the NFL, despite having won back-to-back Super Bowls. Now, this is obviously folly. This is obviously stupidity. I think there is something even graver at the bottom of these articles, even less impressive at the bottom of these rankings. And guys, we should have seen it coming a long, long time ago. Like I was saying, we talk about, it's Kansas City. The Chiefs are Kansas City, Missouri. Well, why can't they be Kansas City, Kansas? Kansas City is Kansas City. Everyone else is tired of the Chiefs. Everybody else is tired of us being able to have these arguments. Everyone else is tired of watching the Chiefs in the playoffs. Everyone else is tired of seeing the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. This was not. The Arrow Headlines article came out swinging with the idea that I think their article was, the Arrow Headlines article was headlined by the statement the Kansas City Chiefs have the fourth best roster in the NFL, parentheses, no seriously, end parentheses. Everyone is doing this because they're so tired of the Kansas City Chiefs. So I put together a couple of different things that we can talk about, that we can raise, a couple other points we can raise when the specter of the Chiefs being the fourth best roster in the NFL is presented to us as Kansas City Chiefs fans. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs have several returning starters from both of the last two Super Bowls. Victories, by the way, Super Bowl victories, by the way, on offense. From the last two Super Bowl victories, the Kansas City Chiefs return starters Patrick Mahomes, Isaiah Pacheco, Trey Smith, Creed Humphrey, Joe Thuney, and Travis Kelce. Now, Joe Thuney didn't start in the last Super Bowl. I understand that. He was injured. The point remains. The fact remains. He would have been on the field had he not had his pectoral issue. So that's 6 of 11 starters from the last two Super Bowl. There were more starters that started on last year's team. Jawan Taylor, for example, Rashee Rice, for example, that started last year and are returning. Right? That's clear. That's evident. That's obvious. There are more starters from those two teams back. There are also other contributors. Mecole Hardman contributed in both of those Super Bowls. The only point I'm getting at here is that these players all started on consecutive Super Bowl victory teams. Obviously, again, Joe Thuney's an asterisk, I understand. That's 6 of 11. Over half of your offense from 2 consecutive Super Bowls is the same, and they were good enough to be the best team in the NFL those 2 consecutive seasons. On defense, it is even clearer. George Karlaftis, Derek Nottie, Chris Jones, Nick Bolton, Jalen Watson, Trent McDuffie, and Justin Reid. Now, Jalen Watson was listed as a starter in the Eagles Super Bowl as the nickel corner. I believe that was true in the Super Bowl last year as well versus the 49ers. I did not check. I believe it's true, though. That's 7. That's 7 of 11 starters from 2 consecutive Super Bowls. That's 13 of 22 players that were the best in the NFL the past 2 seasons are back. Now, almost invariably, the 49ers are listed above the Kansas City Chiefs in these lists. How many of the 49ers starters from a Super Bowl loss return? How many of the starters from the 49ers previous season also return? Why would that count for better than 13 out of 22 starters here in Kansas City? But that's not all. That need not be the only point that we raise. Positional value is a thing in the NFL. Positional value is very important. There are certain players, certain positions that are more important towards winning than other positions. We talked about Joe Thuney. Joe Thuney, one of the best offensive guards in the NFL. Nick Allegretti, a career backup, not saying anything negative about it, but he has been a backup nearly his entire career. Came in, and the offensive line didn't particularly miss a beat. Offensive tackles go down, and all of a sudden you have the calamity that allegedly happened in a Super Bowl against the Buccaneers. I don't remember this taking place, but apparently it was there. Apparently it happened. Losing starters at offensive tackle looks different than losing starters at offensive guard. What position in the NFL is the most important? Well, it's quarterback. And the Kansas City Chiefs have the best one. The Kansas City Chiefs have the best quarterback in the NFL. That has to count for something. Apparently, it gets you no higher than fourth on these lists. The Kansas City Chiefs don't have a good tight end. They have the best in the NFL. You can make arguments for a couple other guys. I don't know why you'd want to. You don't have to. You don't have to make an argument for anybody else. Travis Kelce's the best tight end in the NFL, at least as long as you want to win. What about defensive tackle? We talked about positional value. Defensive tackle, not the most valuable position on the defense, not the most valuable position of the 22 starters that happen onto the field at the beginning of every game, but it's very difficult to find a player that is an impact at that position. If you can find one, it will absolutely change your defense. The Kansas City Chiefs have the best defensive tackle in the entire NFL in Chris Jones. And yes, Travis Kelce and Chris Jones are two of the older statesmen on the Kansas City Chiefs. They don't show any real signs of slowing down. Travis Kelce, a little bit wear and tear last year, but really, it didn't seem to affect him at all in the playoffs. Now, if we're talking about the 2024 season, we have to acknowledge that the 2023 season happened. That's something that these writers don't seem to be doing in their articles because the Kansas City Chiefs were the best team in all of football last year. But we're going to incorporate this. There are questions for every football team. The Kansas City Chiefs are no different, despite the fact that they're the best. The Kansas City Chiefs had 4 real big questions heading into this offseason after winning the Super Bowl last year. Number 1 was wide receiver. They addressed the wide receiver position in free agency with Hollywood Brown, in the draft with Xavier Worthy, a player that that multiple teams were willing to make a move up for in the draft, and it happened to be the Kansas City Chiefs that got the deal done. And via internal development with Rashee Rice, Nico Remigio, and Justin Ross. I think I'm being very fair in not putting Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore on this list because despite the fact that they are young as well, we haven't really seen any progress from them. In fairness, on the downside of things, we haven't seen a whole lot of progress from Nico Remigio or Justin Ross either. Justin Ross disappointingly so. Nico Remigio obviously so because he spent last season mysteriously on the injury list, which seems to be something that happens in Kansas City towards the end of training camp sometimes, I'm just saying. And Rashee Rice, who did emerge as a number 1 type target last year. Rashee Rice could develop. If he's on the field, I understand. If Rashee Rice enters the season as the Rashee Rice that ended last season, whenever the beginning of his season is, he is a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. That becomes an answer to the wide receiver question. The offensive line, mainly the offensive tackle position, was addressed this year as well. It was a question mark, the offensive tackle position, not necessarily the offensive line, but again, in that alleged Super Bowl against the Buccaneers, we saw what happens when an entire offensive line is picked off one by one during the course of a season. The Kansas City Chiefs addressed the offensive line with 3 draft picks: Kingsley Suamataia at offensive tackle, Hunter Nourzad at offensive guard and offensive center, and CJ Hansen, I believe he's a listed offensive lineman, but probably a guard by trade that I think is going to get the opportunity to fail out of being an offensive tackle. Doesn't sound like an impressive thing, but I think it's an impressive feat. Because it could be that he succeeds at being an offensive tackle, and if you get an offensive tackle in the 7th round, it's a pretty good deal. Also, the Kansas City Chiefs will be addressing the offensive tackle position through internal development via Wanye Morris, a guy who ended up starting 4 games last season, playing 339 snaps, I believe it was total. A guy who acquitted himself well early in that tenure and kind of fell off as he kept having to play. Something that we kind of should have seen coming, right? He was a 3rd rounder, late 3rd rounder. You don't want that guy to have to come in his rookie season and start at left tackle, but it happened. And he didn't get totally destroyed out there. So it shows promise for development in the future. The Kansas City Chiefs also had questions at defensive tackle. And they will be entering 2024 with questions at defensive tackle. There are a couple of UDFA at the position that are maybe promising. I like Fabian Levette. Alex Gubner was brought in on a tryout and signed to the 90-man roster. Got an interesting build. Alex Gubner can move around a little bit, so we'll see what happens there. But this is the first place that you can really say the Kansas City Chiefs have not done any work this preseason in order to get better. But, guys, it didn't hurt them last year. They were a really good defense last year, and Derek Nottie and Tershawn Wharton, they didn't do good, but they didn't look bad. This Kansas City Chiefs defense was perfectly commendable with those defensive tackles. And then cornerback. With the loss of L'Jarius Sneed, there were questions around the cornerback position for the Kansas City Chiefs. But here in Kansas City, part of the charm of Brett Veach is that there are always new cornerbacks. There are always new safeties. So, do you genuinely believe that there could have been any other team in the NFL that went back-to-back in Super Bowls and entered the next season listed as the number 4 team in the NFL? In that impressive Patriots run, if Tom Brady had retired after that repeat performance, they would have been listed as the number 1 team in the NFL, and rightfully so. They earned it. They earned that. If Tom Brady had retired after the repeat in New England, they would have entered the next season ranked as the number 1 team despite losing their quarterback because they earned that. The Kansas City Chiefs, too, have earned that, and it is not being given to them. Had Tom Brady retired from the Patriots after that repeat performance, everyone would have said, yeah, they lost their signal caller, they lost the greatest to ever do it, but this team won back-to-back Super Bowls. That counts for something. They must know a thing or two. That same credit is not being given to the Kansas City Chiefs. It's just not, and it's not going to be. Especially the journalists from, New York? The journalists from, LA? The journalists that probably have their fancy degrees. They're looking at flyover country, whether that flyover country is on the Kansas half of the state line or the Missouri half of the state line, and they're saying, I'm tired of that, and so are you, dear reader. If I write this article and I list the Kansas City Chiefs as the number 1 best team in the NFL, you will not think that I am clever. And your team will be exposed for as hopeless as they are. They will be. If I let it be known from my writerly, well-educated, Ivy League maybe, Syracuse degree probably, office, while I'm writing for, I don't even know what the article, I don't even know who's putting out articles anymore. ABC, Disney, Bleacher Report. I don't know anything about Bleacher Report, I'm going to be very honest. But any of these positions, you will click on this article, see the Kansas City Chiefs as number one, and think, yeah, click off. This does not give me hope. But if I, the incredibly important and intelligent journalist, list the Kansas City Chiefs as the fourth best team in the NFL, you see an opening for your football team. Whether number one is the 49ers, whether it's the Lions, whoever it is that I put number one, you think, man, I am a Jets fan. I am a Giants fan. Is there any teams that don't play in New York? I am a Cowboys fan. I believe my team can beat the 49ers. You probably don't feel the same way about thinking about your team going up against Patrick Mahomes. So it helps everyone, except for us. For all of these writers to do their darndest and write their little articles and look so clever by putting anyone but the Kansas City Chiefs as the number one team. But once that ball kicks off, once you hear "Start Me Up," none of it is going to matter. Because the Kansas City Chiefs this season are going to run through the NFL like a hot knife through butter. That's all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, the Kansas City Chiefs are the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week, and I hope to have you back for the next one.